Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining NYSERD Trust Services monthly webinar series, where today we're going to be taking a deep dive into how to qualify financially for Medicaid services in 2023, and really put a big focus this month on the asset side, how we can help you protect your family assets and also your hard-earned income so that you can qualify for long-term care services without depleting your life savings, and by preserving your monthly income so that you can continue to afford your monthly bills so that you can live at home for as long as possible. Before we jump in, we just want to remind everyone that you are all muted by default, just to limit any background noise, and we have disabled the chat. We ask that you please put any questions that you have into the Q&A. We will be monitoring that throughout today's presentation, and we will reserve some time at the end to go through those questions. If you have any specific questions about your individual situation, we encourage you to contact our organization following today's training to discuss any details or specifics related to your private information. We've also enabled closed captioning, so please turn that on your end if you'd like to get the closed captioning. And a link to today's materials will be provided in an email within 24 hours of today's training. So you should receive an email some point tomorrow with a copy of the materials. Nina will also be dropping a link to those into the chat and into the Q&A so that you can download those today if you'd like. A recording of today's session will be available about a week from today on our website at nysertrustservices.org/webinars. And at the close of today's presentation, we do ask that you take a couple minutes just to complete a brief survey. Let us know what you thought about today's training. And we do want to remind everyone that these sessions are provided for educational purposes, and nothing that we discuss today should be construed as legal advice. If you're watching this training down the road, some of this information may change in the future as we're talking about the qualifications for how to get Medicaid coverage, and those can change annually and sometimes even more frequently than that. So do encourage you to keep that in mind. I'm very excited this morning to introduce today's guest speaker. I'm very grateful to have Frank Hemming from Pierro, Connor & Strauss joining us today. We've spoken about how to qualify for Medicaid in the past, and we've gone in depth about how to pooled income trust can help someone protect their income and continue to afford their bills. But many of you have had a lot of questions about how to plan for the need for Medicaid and how to protect your home and other assets, things that you wouldn't necessarily put into a pool trust. So very excited to have Frank joining us today to be talking about that. Frank concentrates his practice in helping families plan for the need for either community Medicaid as well as nursing home Medicaid. And he's going to talk to us about some of the strategies that he can use and attorneys and other firms may use in helping families plan for the need for these long-term care services.
I'm Frank. Again, Sarah, thank you so much for having me. We actually are doing a monthly webinar series as well. Sarah was gracious enough to join us when we did a segment on pooled trust. So now it's kind of nice that I get to return the favor and get to lecture a little bit about what I get to do. So I think before we get into the weeds with assets and things, it's always important just to kind of remember and kind of set the boundaries of like what we're talking about. So when you have to qualify for Medicaid, you want to talk about income, you have to talk about assets. So just as kind of probably a refresher for most, we've got the numbers on the screen now of just what the current income and what the current asset numbers are. So if you're an individual, you want to get home care services, you get a net monthly income limit of $1,697. Not a lot of money. The good thing is it's up pretty substantially from what it was last year. Last year, if we were doing this in December or anytime in 2022, I'd be telling you the monthly income limit was $954. So while $1,697 isn't a huge amount of money, it's substantially higher than it used to be just a few months ago. If you're a couple, you don't get to double $1,697. I always say that makes too much sense, so that's why you can't do that. So if you're a couple where you both need home care services, your combined monthly income goes up to $2,288. And then for assets, because we always have to worry about assets as well. So if you're a single person applying for Medicaid, your asset number has to be below $30,182. Again, not a huge amount of money, but up pretty substantially from just last year. Last year, it was $16,800. So it almost doubled. And then if you're a couple, again, you don't get to double it. If you're a couple, your combined asset number is $40,821. And again, that's up over $16,000 than from what it was just last year. So all things considered, not a lot of money, but considerably better than it was. Other big thing here is if you leave New York, if you talk about Medicaid in another state, most other states have an asset limit of about $2,000. So while $30,000, I'm not going to sit here and say it's a lot, but it's significantly more than $2,000, which is where it is just about everywhere else. So whenever we talk about planning for people, right, we want to take a look at what do we not even have to really plan for? What are some exemptions that you already have? So for one, you have your $30,182 of assets if you're a single person applying. That could be cash, it could be cash value of life insurance, it could be a brokerage account, it could be bonds, it could be, stocks, it could be many things. But there are lots of other things that just don't count. So for one thing, you can have a prepaid burial account. There's no limit to this. So you could have $5,000 on it, you could have $50,000 hypothetically on it, it doesn't matter. So if you have a prepaid burial account, that's an exempt asset. Only caveat here, it has to be an irrevocable arrangement. So if you have a revocable arrangement and you apply for Medicaid, the Medicaid office is going to make you convert that over to an irrevocable arrangement. Another one that we don't encounter a lot of would be if you have a business. So if it's an active business and it's producing income, that business is an exempt asset. So occasionally we do have clients that come to us saying, I have a business and I run it from my house, and I need home care services and I need assistance, but I'm still able to manage my business. So if you have that scenario, weirdly enough, your business doesn't count as an asset as long as it's active. Life insurance, this one's a little depressing, unfortunately. If you have a life insurance policy, if its face value is less than $1,500, it's exempt. Many policies are going to be quite a bit higher than $1,500. The $1,500 number is actually a fossil from 1965 when Medicaid was established. They haven't indexed this for inflation. They haven't updated it. So generally speaking, if you have life insurance, if it has a cash value, it's most likely going to be countable towards that $30,182,000 number for your assets, unless its face value is substantially small, under that $1,500 amount. Big one, maybe one of the biggest things I say to anybody today. So I hope you take many things away from today's program, but if you're going to remember one, remember the next bullet one down, and that's your IRA. So if you have an IRA, as long as it's in payment status, which automatically happens now when you reach the age of 73, your retirement account, the whole body of the account is exempt. So you could have 10,000 in that account, you could have 5 million in that account. If it's an IRA and you're taking periodic payments from it, it is an exempt asset for Medicaid purposes. You don't have to spend it down. You don't have to put it in a trust. You don't have to do anything to it. You keep it right where it is. Many other states do not exempt an IRA for Medicaid purposes. So Florida is another state that does. That they're the biggest other one that I know of. So if you leave New York, right, or you're talking to somebody who lives in another state, chances are IRA is going to be countable there. So just as Sarah said, a lot of what we say on this program is New York specific or 2023 specific. So big one in New York, don't spend down your IRA. Certainly don't do that without talking to a professional like myself or maybe someone at NYSARC, because we don't want you to spend down something you don't have to. Another big one is one car. If you notice, there's not a value next to that because the Medicaid law doesn't have a value for your car. So as long as you have one car, it's exempt. So it could be the beer that needs repairs constantly. It could be the Rolls Royce. It doesn't matter. If you have one car, it's exempt. And that's for home care or nursing home purposes. So even if you'll never use your car again, you can have it. It's a little weird. Never said a lot of this had to make sense. Big one that people are always concerned about is your house. Because for many people, your house is your largest asset. It's what you've worked your whole life to have and afford. So how do we protect your house? Well, for one, it's exempt for Medicaid purposes if you, your spouse, or a minor or disabled child live in that house. So for many folks, your house isn't going to be immediately something that we have to worry about, because we have many scenarios where we need somebody who needs Medicaid in a nursing home. Well, if the well spouse is still in the house, well, the house is exempt. We don't have to do anything with it today. That doesn't mean we don't want to plan for something ultimately for it. But your house, generally speaking, in many contexts, is not going to be a countable asset. If we're doing Medicaid home care benefits for people, well, then by definition, if you're in your house is off the table from an asset perspective. So you don't have to do much for planning for determining whether your house is going to make you eligible or not. There are some transfer exemptions that specifically go towards a house. So one that we use when we can. There's something called the caretaker child exception. So essentially, if you've lived in the residence and provided a nursing home level of care to somebody for a period of 2 years, you can transfer that house to that caretaker child free of penalty, free of any 5-year look back problems. There's not a lot of instances where we find this, but if it's there and we can use it, it's something we certainly want to consider. If you have a sibling who's on the deed with you with an equity interest for at least a year, you can transfer it to them. Biggest one that we probably use in this context, if we're not going to use a trust or anything, is that disabled child exception. So big one that I think a lot of people just aren't aware of is you can freely transfer assets to a disabled child at any time, regardless of its value. It does not create any Medicaid eligibility for the person making the transfer. So if we have a disabled child, right, we have many clients that come in and they say, my son, my daughter, they're on Social Security disability. Well, if they're disabled and they're your child and we can prove those things, we can freely transfer things to them, including your house. Only caveat that comes with that would be if you have a disabled child, sometimes they're on benefits themselves. They may be on SSI, Medicaid, something like that. So we don't want to just transfer them things without making considerations as to how what we give them will affect their own benefits. So if we have somebody who's just on Social Security disability, that's completely based on their ability to work. There's no issues with transferring them stuff and we save it from Medicaid. If you're in a nursing home, sometimes we do use something called an intent to return home document. It's essentially something that we sign that gets the house off the table as accountable asset if you go to a nursing home and we haven't done any previous planning. I don't want to dive into the weeds too much about that, but it is something that we can do if the need arises. And the biggest thing that we're concerned about with your house is that bottom bullet, and that's liens and estate recovery. So essentially, I'm going to try to make a very complicated topic relatively quick and simple. The rule when it comes to recovery, because that's another thing that we counsel people about a lot, that people are generally worried about, is what happens when I pass? Does Medicaid get everything? The rule in New York is if there's anything that goes through your estate, meaning it's in just your name, no beneficiary's name to it, no co-owner's name to it, not in a trust. If it goes through your estate, Medicaid can recover against it. So one of the reasons why we do a lot of things like trusts or transferring the house is not only to get it away from Medicaid, but it's also we want to make sure that if you're on Medicaid, nothing goes through your estate, and then they don't reclaim against things like your house or your other assets. So transfers, right? I have already kind of said that word, I think, a few times. So let's just clarify what we're talking about. There is a 5-year look back period for nursing home care. That's been in place since roughly 2005, I believe, 2005 or 2006. It's been around for quite a while. It's not 5 years, or it's 5 years. It's not 7 years. It's not 9 years. I hear all kinds of interesting numbers from clients. It's still 5, and I don't believe we've heard anything of them rumored to be changing that number. So for nursing home purposes, there's a 5-year look back if you need to qualify for Medicaid for the nursing home. For home care, today, as we're doing this webinar, there's no look back for home care. That will likely continue until approximately April of next year. There were rules that were changed back in, believe it or not, 2020 when COVID was happening that wanted to institute a 2.5-year look back period for home care benefits. The state has not been able to implement these changes because of the public health emergency, but we've been given word that that's likely to change in April of next year from what we know. So if you need home care benefits now or prior to April of next year, there's no look back. We can do whatever we need to do to move assets around to make you eligible, get you down below that $30,182 asset number that I mentioned right at the start. And then penalties, right? So if there's a look back period, what they do, the local county Medicaid offices, they will audit all of your accounts and they will look at what you've done with your finances over that period of time. They will track every transaction that you've done, especially those over $2,000. And if they find that you've given things away, they will assess a penalty. And then you don't get Medicaid for a period of time because you gave away money. So how do we get people actually eligible for benefits? Biggest tool in our toolbox is something that we call a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. It's a type of irrevocable trust. And we use it to hold all different types of things, but it can hold things like your house, your stock, your life insurance, other assets that you have. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. So a trust at the end of the day is an arrangement that you create, that you set up, assets go into it. The way we typically design it is that your income would then come out of it. And it's managed by a trustee. So let's talk quickly about that. So if you have a trust, It's an agreement that you make with someone else to be your trustee to manage everything that's in the trust. Now, with an irrevocable trust, it's the safest thing to do is to not appoint the maker of the trust, the grantor of the trust, to be the trustee. So if mom or dad comes to us and says, I want to protect my assets to qualify for Medicaid, typically we're going to say, well, how's your relationship with your kids? If you have a good relationship with kids, normally the kids are going to be the trustee or the trustees. You can pick and choose whoever you want. And the nice thing is, and this is always my favorite part whenever we have a client meeting about this stuff, is if you appoint your children or anybody as your trustee, you can fire your trustee at any time for any reason. So if you don't like your kids, you can get rid of them, remove them from the trust. They won't be your trustee anymore if something happens with the relationship from when you set it up. Other big piece when it comes to a trust, so we have our maker, we have our trustee. Last party that we're worried about are your beneficiaries, and that's who gets everything when you pass. Typically, again, that's usually children. It could be siblings, it could be grandchildren, it could be charities. It's anyone that you choose. But essentially, the trust is then designed to work during your lifetime, have someone manage it for you while you're alive, and then it goes to whomever you want when you pass. So what do we put in it? We put in your house, your bank accounts, if you have cash above that $30,000 number. You have stocks, same thing. You have annuities. If they're non-qualified, they count. So if it's a qualified annuity, it's essentially an IRA. I already said, don't send those down. They're exempt. If it's a non-qualified annuity, it's an asset. Should go in a trust like this if you have it. If you have life insurance, again, your cash value is what counts towards asset numbers. So if you have life insurance with cash value, it's probably going in the trust. If you have that business, right? If it's not active anymore, it's an asset. Want to throw it in the trust. If you have other real estate, right? We have plenty of people that have, another vacant piece of property somewhere that maybe they inherited from somebody, or family camp. That's another big one we hear quite often. So if you have other real estate besides your house that we want to protect, no reason not to put it in the trust. If you have anything typically in the trust that makes income, we're usually going to let you have the income. So at the end of the day, the nice thing I get to tell people is if you do a trust like this to do some asset protection, your trust doesn't change your income picture in any way. Your Social Security, your pensions, all your monthly income, that still goes to your accounts just like it always would. And then whatever we put in this, that would be your principal. So let's say we put in some cash. If we put in some cash in your house, if you need to get cash out, you actually can get it out. We just give it out through your beneficiary. So the biggest take home here is if we do put anything in your trust, it's not locked in here. We can get it out where then the children or the other beneficiaries can use it for you or for the whoever the grantor of the trust is. We don't put everything you own in your trust. We want you to have some cash, right? You can have $30,000 of assets. So you might as well keep some cash in your bank account because you probably want to make sure that you can do some things. We also typically would keep out, maybe a small life insurance policy, a small brokerage account, just something that doesn't put you anywhere near that $30,000 asset number. And then, as I mentioned right at the start, biggest one, right? Your IRA, your 401, they stay out of this trust. You don't have to protect them with a trust. They stay out. They're yours. We just want to make sure they're in payment status. And again, just kind of recapping, you can change your trustee whenever you want. You can actually change your beneficiaries whenever you want. So if we set this up to pay out to your kids and you have a falling out with one or all of them, you can always change your beneficiaries as well. And then probably one of the craziest things that I will say while I'm speaking today, even though the trust says it's irrevocable, it actually can be revoked with the consent of the beneficiary. So if you do all this and you hate all of it, if you want to tear it all down, you can. We build that in. Or if something happens, you don't make the 5 years, we have a nursing home event happen, you also then could technically revoke the trust if we need to. Biggest advantages that come with doing a trust like this. One, it avoids probate, right? Keeps everybody out of court, because at the end of the day, if court is needed when you pass, the ones who win are people like me. It's your attorneys, and certainly don't want to give us more money than you have to. Gives you the ability to determine how you distribute assets, gives you flexibility with who your trustees are, gives you full access to your income because it doesn't change anything. You get access to your principal through your beneficiaries, and it can be revoked. All of these things are good, and I think many times people are very surprised when they kind of hear the full spiel about how all this works. Other biggest advantage that comes with this in terms of Medicaid is it helps you qualify for Medicaid. So we have that 5-year look back period for nursing home. So if you do this trust while you're healthy, you put your assets in, you live your life, then at least 5 years goes by. If then you need the nursing home after the 5 years, everything that's been in your trust for that period, now it's safe, it's off the table, they can't take it anymore. And it's completely preserved for your family, your spouses, your siblings, whoever your beneficiaries are going to be. The other nice advantage that's a little harder to explain is it creates community Medicaid eligibility immediately. Because again, there's no look back period. So we put stuff in, we get you qualified for Medicaid real fast for community purposes. And that little bullet on the bottom is important to note, because if we get to April of next year and we have that 2.5-year look back, then the idea will be set the trust up healthy for at least 2.5 years. If then you need home care, then you get home care Medicaid, and they don't penalize you for any of your assets having been transferred. So let's do an example, because I know that was a lot, and I'm trying just to get through what I want to say. I want to give Sarah some time to talk about what she wants to talk about, and we will have some time for Q&A and stuff after we're both done. But I think it would be best to kind of look at just an example of kind of what this looks like in actual practice with a person. So we have Rachel. She was hospitalized. She's a widow. She's in her 80s. She's in rehab. Kids aren't really sure what's going on. This is a pretty typical case or example for us, like when people want to come in and talk about planning. She's got some memory loss. She can get disoriented at times, but she's verbal. She has a local daughter, and she needs some home care. Ultimately, she needs some help in her house, and she doesn't want to go to the facility. Right? I've been doing Medicaid work for just over 8 years. I've still really yet to see somebody who walks into the office and says, I really, really am excited, and I really, really want to go to that nursing home as I get older. Everyone wants to stay in their house. She's no different. So this is kind of how we can construct a plan to let her do that. So if we take a look at her financial picture, she gets some Social Security, she gets a pension. So we totaled that up to be $23.45 a month. She's got her house, she's got an IRA, she's got some savings and some checking, some cash, and she's got a brokerage account. Again, pretty standard. A lot of people come in, they have similar pictures to this where they have a house and, maybe an IRA and maybe some other stuff. So in order for Rachel to get Medicaid in her house, we're going to create that Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. We're going to put in her home and her brokerage account, because those are the things that we want to protect long-term from the nursing home for her. And then she creates a pooled trust for her income, because again, her income allowance is that $1,697 number. She makes more than that. So we're going to assign approximately $648 of her income to her pooled trust, where they can use people like NYSARC and Sarah. And then she's Medicaid eligible. Because now when Medicaid looks, she's got assets of $25,000 because she's got her cash, but really nothing else that counts. Her IRA doesn't. We've assigned her income over to her pooled trust, and now her income's down to the limit. And now she's eligible for September 1st, because again, there's no look back period. So I think it's always important just to kind of go through timing of just kind of how Medicaid works, because I know this is another thing that confuses people. So Medicaid works as of the 1st of every month. So essentially that means you're either eligible as of the 1st or you're not. If you're eligible, we can apply in that month. If you're not, then we have to wait till the following month to even apply for you. So if Rachel came to me today, so today's August 17th, if we moved quickly, we created that trust, we got that deed done, as long as we can move that brokerage account, we could actually have her eligible in roughly 2 weeks, and we could apply for September. If something happens and we weren't able to accomplish that in 2 weeks, which would be a bit of a stretch to do unless we moved very quickly, we may be applying as of October 1st. It's just a matter of how fast we can actually create and move things. And then once we've actually submitted our documentation to the Medicaid office, they have 45 days to process it in some circumstances. But in a case like Rachel's, because she's using that pooled trust, they actually have 90 days to go through that application and offer a decision, or at least get in contact about other needed information. So generally speaking, when we're counseling clients about timelines and everything, we're usually forecasting that from the time you apply to the time you have aides in your house for the assistance, it's going to be in the window of 4 to 6 months. It kind of depends on some other factors, but just to kind of give an idea of just generally how long we're seeing things take for those. Quickly, I want to mention spousal refusal. If you're in the Medicaid world, I'm sure you've heard of spousal refusal. It's a tool that we use when no real planning has been done previously, where we have a healthy spouse and we can actually move everything to the healthy spouse, get it out of the Medicaid spouse's name, and have Medicaid only for the spouse that needs it. It is a creation of federal law. New York has tried to defeat this 20-something years in a row. They've not been successful in the past or currently, so it is still a tool that we use. Essentially what it is, it's the well spouse saying, I need my income, I need my assets for myself, I'm not going to contribute towards the cost of my spouse's care because I need stuff for me. It's not a great thing to say. It makes people uncomfortable. We understand that, but at the end of the day, it is something that we can use to get Medicaid for a spouse if there is a healthy spouse and no other planning has been done. The biggest thing that comes with spousal refusal, though, is that if you refuse, the state is given the opportunity to come either ask for a contribution of your income, or they actually do have the ability to come and sue the well spouse for assets over the allowance. And essentially the allowance for community spouses from an asset perspective is roughly $75,000 in many circumstances. So essentially what we have to kind of plan for is that if you refuse, depending on where you live, depending on your asset numbers, depending on your overall picture, we may have to talk about what happens if the county wants to come back and ask for either a contribution or seeks or starts a lawsuit. I'm not the litigator in the firm. We have had cases like this happen while I've been here, but I would say they are generally few and far between. So I feel like it's not accurate to say this won't happen to you. I think it's unlikely it'll happen to most, but just I think more than anything, it is something that we will use if we have to. It's still available, and we'll walk you through any real questions that you have. So with that, I'm through all my stuff. So Sarah, if you want to jump back over, jump on, take over, talk about what you want to do with the pooled trust, I'll stick around and we can talk about anything else once you're done.
Great, thank you. And if you can just stop your screen share, I'll go ahead and pull up my slides.
There you go.
Thank you, Frank. And while I'm doing that, I think, again, just for those listening, the key takeaway here with the assets is that there are options, right? There's many different options, and those options are going to change based on whether or not you are married, whether or not both of you need care at the same time, if there's just one spouse that needs care. And so there are so many different ways to plan. And even if you do not plan, there are ways to get you eligible for these benefits and still preserve a good portion of your assets. So just want people to be encouraged there and know that if you've been told you won't qualify, know that there are options. Before I jump into the pooled trust, I do just want to remind those attendees who are putting questions in the chat and raising hands, please do put any questions you have into our Q&A so we can keep track of those, answer those, and certainly follow up after today's training as well. So thank you, Frank, for that comprehensive overview of protecting the assets. Now we're going to talk about once we have gotten someone eligible by reducing their countable assets and they are now ready to apply for Medicaid, what to do about that excess income. Because in our example, Rachel, her income is still going to be above those limits. And in some cases, some people may not even need to protect any assets. They may already be eligible from an asset standpoint, but many individuals who need home care are going to have income that is above the financial limits. As Frank mentioned, those limits are much higher this year, so that's good news. That means more people will qualify without the need for a pooled trust. But this is a tool that can be used when you go to apply for the benefit, right? So pooled trust is not necessarily something that you typically set up in advance of needing Medicaid services. This is something that you're going to establish when you're ready to apply, or if you're already getting Medicaid services and you have a need to spend down income or assets. Pooled trust, like the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, is an irrevocable trust. Like the burial plan, it must be irrevocable in order to protect your eligibility for benefits. You're depositing your income into the trust. It becomes the property of that trust so that it's no longer counted when you apply for Medicaid. And a nonprofit organization is going to manage that money to allow you to use it for your non-medical expenses. In order to use a pooled trust, you do have to have a qualifying disability. So it can be people with disabilities of any age who may receive Social Security disability income, for example, and other types of Medicaid, or would be applying for Medicaid waiver programs. And it's also primarily used by older adults in New York State, people who are over the age of 65, who are in need of long-term care services and have some sort of disabling chronic condition. So this is going to allow us to preserve Rachel's $648 minus that a nominal cost from the pooled trust to administer the account and help them to use the funds to pay their monthly expenses. The trust will deduct any expenses for their services directly out of a person's spend down amount. So that's always a question we get of kind of, do you pay the fees on top of a spend down? You're only putting the amount of your income that Medicaid tells you you're over the limit. You're still going to receive your Social Security and all other sources of your income the same way you have them now. You'll be required to deposit that extra money into the trust, and then fees for those services will come out of that amount. Your other option, if you do not use a pooled trust, is to pay that money to Medicaid or use it on medical bills. So $648 is quite high of a spend down. If Rachel didn't have access to that money, she might have difficulty paying her rent and other expenses. So this is really a lifeline for older adults and individuals looking to get home care services, because it is often the only way that someone can qualify financially for Medicaid to cover the cost of long-term care. And it is important to note, I know we've talked a little bit about nursing home and community Medicaid. The pooled trust for your income is used only when you're receiving services in the community. Once you go into a nursing home, we have other planning options, and that's something I'll talk about in a few minutes. So before we move on to talk a little bit more about this example and how Rachel's going to use the pooled trust with her income, I also want to remind everyone that pooled trust can be used to protect income and assets. Now, in most cases, when you're going to apply for Medicaid, the types of assets that you're looking to protect, like your home and your brokerage accounts and things, those are going to be better suited for a Medicaid asset protection trust. Those are not going to be something you would want to put into a pooled trust because of the irrevocability of it and the payback provision of Medicaid when you die. But for some individuals who may be under the age of 65, who've been disabled due to an accident, might be coming into a large sum of money from a settlement, those individuals may benefit from putting some of those assets into a pooled trust in order to become financially eligible, or if you're already receiving these services and you come into a windfall of money. A pooled trust can also be used when someone is over the age of 65. It is the only option to deposit funds into a supplemental needs trust once someone is over the age of 65. And as Frank mentioned earlier, in some cases when you're planning, if you have a child with a disability, one of those exempt transfers is also to fund a third-party supplemental needs trust for their benefit. So many ways that you can use a pooled trust in your planning for Medicaid eligibility. And this is going to allow individuals, Medicaid applicants, to become financially eligible for these services and maintain that continuous coverage that they need month to month in order to get the home care services. For some individuals, it might not even be that they're applying for Medicaid just for home care. There's many other benefits to Medicaid services like transportation, dental coverage, that some people might be using Medicaid for those services as well. Reducing your accountable income in a pooled trust also allows some individuals to qualify for the Medicare Savings Program, which can give the individual applicant a savings of about $165 a month at a minimum for this year. So in many ways, that can help offset any costs, any monthly expenses of a pooled trust to manage that income. And ultimately, the main goal of this program is to allow individuals to get the care that they need where they want it, as Frank mentioned, in the comfort of their own home. And it can also provide support to family caregivers who might be taking on a lot of the responsibilities of managing their loved one's care, sometimes financially contributing to that care, and in many cases, contributing a lot of time to assist their loved ones. These services can help you get respite and also reduce some of those costs if you're currently private paying for care. So when it comes to, we've identified someone who would be a good fit for this program. And again, applying for this pooled trust when it's your own money is generally going to be when you are already receiving Medicaid services and have a need to spend down funds, or you are ready to apply for Medicaid. So let's go through kind of the steps from beginning to end. And the order of these steps will vary depending on where you are in this process. So we're going to kind of walk through this like with our example, Rachel. So we've started up and we've already kind of knocked off steps 1 and 2. She's reduced her accountable assets. She's now below the asset limit. That is when you go and apply for the Medicaid services, even though your income is still too high. We have to apply for Medicaid in order to get the determination and determine exactly how much you are over that limit. And if you are not already formally deemed disabled, you will need to submit some extra forms with your Medicaid application. At least one of those will need to be filled out by a doctor. The rest can typically be completed by the family. That's a very important step that you don't want to forget to do because it can delay a person's access to care. You're ready to go and put your spend down into the pooled trust, but if you've not been formally deemed disabled, they may not allow you to make deposits into that trust until you have completed that step. So that can take about as long as the Medicaid application. So we generally encourage people to do that at the same time. Then once you're ready to apply for the pooled trust, it's a pretty quick and easy process. It takes about 1 week to open up a pooled trust. So generally that is something that you're going to do once you know what your spend down is going to be as you get closer to being ready to make those deposits. However, in some counties around the state, they do ask that you submit that paperwork in order to initiate the disability determination process. So it's important that you're in communication with your local county and understand the order of steps, how they want to receive things, so that you can get everything in a timely manner and get care in place as quickly as possible. So the joint agreement is a basic demographic information we're looking to collect about the individual who's applying for Medicaid, who we call the trust beneficiary. That does need to be signed and notarized by the beneficiary or someone with the legal authority to establish the trust on their behalf, like a power of attorney, for example. Anyone signing other than the beneficiary, please make sure you provide that documentation along with the application. And then we need to see some supporting documents, copy of a Social Security card, Social Security benefit award letter, and then the funding for the trust. So in our program, you can fund electronically from your bank account, or you can also send a check made payable to the community trust for the benefit of the beneficiary's name. And we have step-by-step instructions of this process on our website. So we encourage you to use that as a resource. And the final step of establishing a pooled trust, and one thing that is very important, is to then inform Medicaid of your participation in the trust. Now, if you're working with a professional, in some cases, they may be doing this for you, where they're going to receive this documentation and submit it to your Medicaid office. But if you are working on your own and not with a professional, make sure that you do submit a copy of your joinder agreement. And sometimes they want to see a verification of your first deposit into the trust. Now that Rachel's trust is open, we can talk about what are some of the ways that she may use this trust to pay her monthly living expenses. And the rules about how the funds in the trust can be used is that it's got to be for Rachel's primary benefit. So the primary benefit of the Medicaid applicant. And that's going to be items and services that are for that person, bills in their name, and things that they need that will improve their quality of life. When you're ready to use the trust, you're going to submit requests to the trust. Each trust has a little bit of a different process, but generally you're going to complete a form requesting a distribution, and you need to attach some accompanying documentation, like a copy of a bill or a statement that is owed to a third party. The trust is always going to pay a third party and can never give money out of this account to the Medicaid applicant or to their spouse or to a bank account that is in that spouse's name or that they're jointly on. Even if it's not that Medicaid applicant's money in the account, just their name being on the account makes all of the funds in that account theirs. So we're always going to pay a third party, either a business for to satisfy a bill, or someone other than the beneficiary or their spouse who we're repaying for a purchase they made on behalf of our beneficiary. So many options. And because we cannot put money into their bank account or give them cash out of this account, it's very important that if they want to go out and make purchases throughout the month, that they do that on a credit card. Making purchase on a credit card allows us to repay the credit card debt to a third party and not refund the individual's account, because we cannot do that. And it's important that individuals are using all of the funds in their trust and regularly submitting requests to spend down these funds, because upon the death of the beneficiary, these funds will not be returned to family. They will are usually retained by the pooled trust to support other people with disabilities, or they are go to repay Medicaid for the services that were provided to that person during their lifetime. So really important that you're staying in communication with your pooled trust and regularly utilizing those funds. Now, that is the case for a first-party trust where you're funding it with your own money, but do keep in mind if you create a third-party pooled trust for your child with a disability, we don't have that payback provision. So it's going to be dependent on the pooled trust, how they have their kind of account closure structured. In NYSARC, we have a third-party pooled trust. We do not retain any funds upon the death of the beneficiary. The donor would name in their document who those would go to, and then we would distribute the assets once a final accounting of the trust has been done and any closing fees have been paid. So with Rachel's deposit each month, she's going to make an electronic deposit from her bank account on a monthly basis of her $648. That's how much she is over the Medicaid limit. The trust will start out the month by deducting a monthly fee for the cost of the services to manage the trust on her behalf, leaving her with just shy of $600 a month to spend on her bills. Now, keep in mind, she also has funds outside of the trust that she's not putting into her pooled trust. She's got the $1,697 a month she gets to keep in her checking account that she's not putting into a pooled trust. She's also got that $25,000 of assets that are available to her. And then, as Frank mentioned, there's potentially some income that could be generated from the assets in her Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. So a lot of the times we get questions, with $600, how's my mom going to be able to pay all of her bills? She won't be able to pay all of her bills with the $600 in the pooled trust, but between the funds she's got outside of the trust and what she has in the trust, she should be able to satisfy her monthly expenses. So with her $600 a month, we're typically going to look for bills that are the same amount each month, because those are things that can be automated. And we're going to try and pick a few larger bills to reduce the amount of paperwork that the family or the beneficiary needs to submit to the trust each month in order to use the funds in their account. So just looking at what she's got available, we're going to pick a couple of her monthly expenses. And generally, we're going to recommend that she sends the same bills to the trust each month. It just makes things easier. She's able to, plan her expenses so that she knows what bills are being paid out of her checking account and what's being paid out of her trust account. We can make partial payments on bills. We don't need to pay a full bill. Very few people, these numbers work out exactly where everything flows perfectly. And keep in mind too, that money that she deposits into the trust, whatever is not used at this time, because there's no community look back, will roll over to the next month. Here's some other just best practices. Pick larger bills. Pick things that you can always get another copy of. If you lose the receipt, the trust isn't going to be able to pay for that expense. We generally would be able to, find something else we could pay for, again, to free up cash for that. But it can be helpful to pick bills that are larger vendors, because those are typically vendors that we can pay through ACH payment rather than having to mail a paper check. And there's many ways to make using the trust as efficient as possible. So we really encourage you to be in communication with your pool trust, because we've been doing this for a long time, and we can help arrange your bills in a way to make this process as easy as possible. Now, I did mention briefly that the pool trust is used to protect someone's eligibility for home care services. So you're able to deposit your excess income as long as you're getting Medicaid benefits in a community-based setting. It doesn't have to be a home. It could be your apartment. It can even be an assisted living program, but it's got to be a community-based setting. Now, if you go into a nursing home while you're receiving community Medicaid and you intend to go back to the community, you will just be on a kind of temporary short-term rehab stay. You'll typically continue to make your deposits into the pooled trust and continue to pay your bills out of the trust so that you have a home to return to when you finish your rehab period. If you go into the nursing home and you don't intend to return home, this is going to be a permanent placement, and you are going to be transitioning to nursing home or chronic care Medicaid, that is when you are no longer going to use a pooled trust. You will stop any deposits to the pooled trust at that time, and the majority of your income minus a small disregard will be sent to the nursing home each month to cover the cost of your care. So once you're in the nursing home or are planning to go to a nursing home indefinitely, be sure to contact your pooled trust immediately. You want to make sure you stop those deposits as soon as possible. And you also want to try and utilize whatever balance that you have in the trust. So when you're making transfers to a trust, once you're over the age of 65, even if it's a pooled trust, those are going to count as a transfer for the 5-year look back period. The way that generally this doesn't impact many Medicaid applicants is that you're spending that money each month on your bills. So typically when you will go to Medicaid for the nursing home, they're going to ask to see what do you have left in your account. The funds you've spent prior to applying for the nursing home care are generally looked at as being spent on you for fair market value. And they're going to just look at the principal balance of what is left in that pooled trust. And that could potentially be an available resource to you. So again, let's say Rachel, a couple years go by, she ends up going into a nursing home. She's got about $1,000 left in her pooled trust. That's going to be an available resource added to what she's got outside of the trust, right? So she's got 25,000 outside of the trust. She's got 1,000 from the pooled trust. That shouldn't result in any sort of penalty period. And again, if you're counseling a client or you anticipate that your client may be going into a nursing home, it's a good idea to contact the pooled trust and try and spend down those assets as much as you can. Also, for those that may be in a nursing home and receiving funds, if you're under the age of 65, you do have the ability to transfer those to a supplemental needs trust or a pool trust, and that is an exempt transfer. So again, all of these are ways that we can help protect individuals when they're going into a nursing home. And before we close and open up to questions, I just did want to take a quick moment to remind everyone that Medicaid recertifications have resumed for 2023. So for those of you that are, working professionally in this world, you know all about this process. But for those that are maybe learning about Medicaid eligibility for the first time, once you apply and get eligible for Medicaid, each year you will need to recertify your eligibility for these services. This has been on pause during the pandemic. We've never really had such a break in these annual recertifications, but they are now coming back. So look out for any letters from Medicaid. Be sure you've updated your contact information from them. They are only going to have to make a few attempts to reach out to you. So if you moved during the pandemic, it's very important that you update your local office, especially if you changed counties. They may need to move your case. And you want to look at your finances to make sure that you are in compliance with those financial eligibility requirements. And certainly contact a pooled trust or an attorney if you have questions about how to spend down those income or assets. Just a reminder that we will be hosting our next webinar on Thursday, September 21st. And this will be the first webinar in a 3-part series where we are going to take a deep dive into NYSARC's pooled trust programs. So part 1, we'll be talking about which trust is right for you. We're going to do a comprehensive overview of all of our different programs, help you identify when a pooled trust would be a good fit for someone and which program might be most appropriate. Part 2, we'll be talking about how to establish and open up one of these trust accounts. And part 3, we're going to take a deep dive into how to use the funds in a trust. We're going to be talking about documentation requirements for specific requests. So please click the link here to join us for that. We look forward to having you.